Hello friends, welcome. In this video tutorial, we are going to look at how to test REST APIs using WebMvcTest and MockMvc. So before we get started, let's first discuss what exactly WebMvcTest is. So WebMvcTest is an annotation that focuses only on Spring MVC test, which means it is used to test the controller layer of your application. Since it only deals with the controller layer of your application, it will not load the full auto configuration. It will just load the configuration related to MVC test, that is your controller layer. The important thing to remember here is that using WebMvc test, we are testing the integration between the controller and the HTTP layer of our application, but not the integration between the controller layer and the business logic of your application. So since it only bootstrap the single controller, we will be using mockbin annotation to mock away the business logic and to create the dependency needed by our controller. We will be using MockMvc annotation along with WebMvcTest annotation, which will mock the HTTP request and HTTP response without needing to start the real server. So to demonstrate how to use the WebMvcTest annotation, we will create a very simple user application which will consist of two REST API using Spring Boot app. So we will first start by creating a REST API which will be of type get localhost /8080/user/user ID, which will return the user details, and then we will go ahead and create another REST API which will be of type post localhost /8080/user, which will save the user details in the application. And we will build both these REST API from scratch, and then we will test it out using WebMvcTest and MockMvc annotation. So let's get started. Okay, so let's create our Spring Boot app using Spring Initializer. So let's go to start.spring.io. Okay, so for the group ID we will enter DevTalkers. For the artifact ID we will enter REST API test. Okay, now we will add the dependencies for this user demo app. So we will require Spring Web as well as Spring.jpa, and for this demo application we will be using H2 database. Okay, so all the dependencies have been defined and added. Now let's go ahead and click on the generate button to generate this demo app. Okay, a zip file has been downloaded. Let's copy this zip file and I will paste this under my H drive demo desk project folder. Okay, next we will extract this and we will extract this under demo desk project folder. Okay, so the zip file has been extracted and we can now see the contents of this Spring Boot app. Okay, so now let's open this Spring Boot app in the IDE. New file, open. Okay, let's open this in a new window. So our application is successfully imported. Let's first have a look at the pom.xml file. So at the time of this video recording, the Spring Boot version that we are using is 2.20.release, and if you scroll down a little, it also includes Spring Boot starter test dependency. And if you click on the Maven tab on the right hand side here and inspect the Spring Boot starter test dependency, you will find that it includes JUnit version 5 and it also includes other transitive dependency which will be required for the testing. So now let's go ahead and configure our H2 database which we will be using for our user demo application. So let's navigate to application.properties file, which is under resource folder, and for our s2 data source we will have these following properties. The name of our database will be testdb. The driver class name is org.s2.driver, username is sa, password will be blank, and we have kept the hibernate.ddl-auto property equal to update, so that at the application startup our tables will be created with respect to our entities. And if you are following me, you can just pause the video and type out these properties manually. Okay, so now let's go ahead and create our first REST API, which will return the user details based on a given ID. We will follow a test driven development approach, and we will create a test class first, and then we will go ahead and drive the remaining code from there. So under the test folder and the package com.devtalkers.rest API test, create a class called user controller test. Okay, now the first thing we need to do is annotate this class with WebMvcTest annotation, and in this annotation we will provide the name of the controller class which we are going to test, and the name of our controller class will be user controller class. Okay, so this user controller class still does not exist, so let's go ahead and create this user controller class, and we will create this user controller class under com.devtalkers.rest API test.controllers. And we'll annotate this controller class with REST controller, as we are creating a RESTful web services. Okay, so now let's get back to our user controller test class and override the user controller class. Okay, also override the MockMvc, which we will be using for mocking the HTTP request and response. Okay, so from our user controller we will be using a service layer which will return the user details based on a given ID. So we will be mocking that service layer, so let's use the annotation mock bin on our service layer, and we will call our service layer as user service. Okay, and now let's go ahead and create this user service interface, and we will name this interface as we will create it under service, and we will name this interface as user interface. Oh, we don't have to provide the name here, we just have to provide the package name. Click on the OK button, and this interface has been created, and this interface will have a method which will return the user, and we will name this method as get user by ID, and this function will accept a parameter ID which is of type integer. Okay, so now this model requires the user entity object to be returned. So now let's go ahead and create this user class. and we will create this user class under entity package. Okay, since this is our JP entity, we will annotate it with entity, and this user class will have an ID field which will be of type, which will be a primary key, and we will annotate it with created value and with strategy to identity, and this user class will have other fields as well, like the username, user email, user gender, and user phone number. Okay, let's go ahead and create the getters and setters for these fields. Okay, so now our user entity class is ready. Now we will get back to our user interface, and the error is gone. So let's create the implementation class of this user service. So under the service package, we will create another class, and we will name this class as user service impl. We will annotate this class with service annotation, and then this class should implement our user service interface, and now we will override the get user by ID method, which we have defined in the user interface, service interface. Okay, and this user service layer will talk to the repository layer to get the user details. So let's auto wire the user repository here, private user repository, user repository, and we will go ahead and create this class, and we will create this class under repository package. And this actually this will be an interface, and this will extend the JPA repository Okay, so let's get back to user service impl, and from this method get user by ID, we will simply return user repository dot find by ID, and we will pass the ID and dot get. So this will now return the user details from the repository layer. Okay, so let's get back to our user controller test and write our test method. So let's write the test method, and we will say public void get user by ID test. We will be testing the REST API, which will return the user details based on a given ID. So let's first write down the step-by-step process which we need to perform in order to test the REST API. So the first thing that we need to do is we have to mock the data that will be returned by the user service method get user by ID, and then we have to create a mock HTTP request to verify the expected response from the REST API. So let's write down the steps. So first thing that we need to do is we have to mock the data returned by the user service class, and then we need to perform a mock HTTP request to verify the expected result. Okay, so our user service will return the user details based on the given ID. So we need to set up the user object for our mocked data. So let's say user equals to new user, and let's set the name of the user to John. Set the email to john@devt.com, John phone number to any random number, and the John Xander. Okay, user dot set. Okay, so all the properties have been set. You don't need to set another property. And so now how to mock the data when the user service get user by ID method is called. So to mock it, what we need to do is when user service method get user by method is called, we should return the mocked user data. The service dot get user by ID, which will accept any integer, and this will return the mocked user data. Okay, so our first step is done. Now let's go ahead and create the mock HTTP request. So MockMvc dot perform MockMvc request builders dot get, and our API will be user slash any user ID, and we are expecting status code to be 200. Along with the status code, we also need to verify that the response returned by this API should match with the mocked user data. So let's do that. We will say dot and expect. We will use the class MockMvc result matches to match the response data, the property name, and this should equal to John. And similarly we will do for other fields as well. Email, phone, and gender. Okay, and this email should be john@devt.com. This phone should have value 96 private 52262, and the gender should be male. So in order to test this, we first have to create this REST API, which we have not created yet. So let's go ahead and create this REST endpoint, and then we will test this out. Okay, so let's jump to user controller and create the get request API, and the URL should be user/id, and this will return response entity with the user data, and we will call this method get user by id. Here we will extract the path variable id, type integer, and here we will return the response entity, and here we will call the user service dot get user by id method, and here we will pass the path variable id, and this should return HTTP code 200 on successful execution. Okay, so we have not auto-wired the user service. Let's do that. User service. So our REST endpoint is ready, and let's go ahead and test this out. Let's jump to user controller test, and we will run this and verify that this REST endpoint user slash with the ID of 12. Let's run this. So we have successfully tested this REST endpoint, and as you can see, the test cases are all passed. Okay, so let's do one more thing here. I will add another method here, print okay. So what this chain method will do here, it will print the request and response on the console, which will be helpful for debugging. So let's run this test again and see and verify that the data that we have mocked is successfully written by this API or not. Let's see that. Okay, so we will be able to see the request and response here, as you can see. So we have made a get request on a URI user with ID of 12, and the response that we have got is this status code with 200, content type as application/h1, and as you can see, the data that we have mocked and the test is successfully verified, and it is also returned as the response body when this HTTP mock request is performed here. The one thing that I want to tell you guys is that if you are using JUnit 4, you need to add one more annotation along with the WebMvc test, and the annotation is run with annotation, and you have to pass the Spring Runner class. Okay. So our first task of creating a get request which return the user details has been done. Now let's go ahead and create another API which is of type post that will save the user details. So let's start by writing the test first. Public void, and we will call this method name it save user test. Okay, and let's write down the steps that we need to perform here. The first thing that we have to do is we have to mock the user data that we want to save. Okay, and then we have to create a mock request. Mock request, this mock request URL will be /user, and this will save the mocked user data. It will mock like that, it is saving the user details. Okay, so let's start with the first step, that is to mock the user data. So I will just copy the mocked user data that we have done in the get user by id test method. So I will just copy this and paste it here. I will add one more setter here for the id field, and let's say for now it is 1. We are saving a user with an id of 1, with the name John, and with email john@devtalkers.com, with phone 965850262, and gender as male. And now we have to mock the behavior when we call the save user APIs. Then our user controller will call the user service, and then user service will save the user details. So we have to mock the behavior when the user service is trying to save the user. So we will say when user service dot save user with any user class, with any user object, then we want to return the mocked user data from the service layer. So we have to create this save user method, which we have not created yet. So let's create this method. And this will return the saved user. Okay, and let's go ahead and implement this method inside the user service IMPL. Override the method save user, and here we'll call the user repository dot save, and we'll pass the user object. Let's get back to our controller class again. The error is gone, and now we will perform the mocked post request to save the user details. So let's say mockmvc dot perform mockmvc request builders, and we will do a post here, and the post URL will be /user, and the content type will be JSON, and what we expect is we expect the status to be is created. So we will send the HTTP code as 201 whenever this user is created by this API, and we expect that whenever this user is created, we expect that the ID field to be present in the response body. So here we say MockMvc result matches dot JSON path, and we want to verify that the ID field exists in the response body whenever the user is created. Similarly, we will assert the other properties here. So I will just copy the fields from our previous method and just paste it here. We also need to pass this user object in the request body of this post API. So let's do that. So we will pass this user object, and we need to pass the user object as a JSON string. For that, we will use object mapper class, which will write this user object as a JSON string. Okay, so our second step is done. Now let's go ahead and create this post API, which is not created yet. So let's jump to user controller class and create the post API, and the endpoint for this API will be user. This will also return the user object as a response. I will name this method as save user, and this will expect the request body as a user. And here we will call the user service layer, and we'll call the save user method of user service class, pass the request body, and we will return the HTTP status code as 201. Okay, so now our API for post request has been created. Let's get back to user control class and run this test and verify the result of our post API. Okay, so test is running now. Okay, so our test case is passed, and we have successfully created a post API slash user. We save the user details. Let's do one thing. Let's intentionally fail this test case by changing the name here, and I will change the name to anything. I will say Mary, and let's run this again, and this should fail now. Okay, so test case is failed as expected, as we intentionally did it. So here it says that The expected name value is Mary, but the actual value was John, because in the mock user object we set the username as John, but here we are verifying that the username should be Mary, so that's why this test case is failed. So this verifies that this is working as expected. I will just change this back to John. Okay, so both of our task of creating the get API to retrieve the user details as well as to save the user has been done. So in this video guide, we have seen that how to use the WebMvc test annotation to test the interaction between the controller layer and the HTTP layer of our application. And you guys may be wondering that why we have created this user repository and also used this user repository from our user service INPL class, but we have not used it in any of our test method. And this is because we are testing the interaction between the controller layer and the HTTP layer of our application. We are not concerned about the business logic here. So using the WebMvc test annotation, we have created a mock server which sends a mock HTTP request and mock HTTP response. So in the next video, I will show you how to do an end-to-end integration testing, in which we will start a real server on a random port and we will test all layers of our application from controller to service and from service to repository. So that's it for now. I will see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.